but he's able to man through, makes it.
Win anything. Sam, defend your team, because they haven't won.
Strap yourselves in, it's another 1 hour episode.
Oh, yeah.
Spike defused.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Press 4 to Defuse, your spot for Valorant esports news and discussion. I'm Darth Mike, this is Ryan, and we are the solo crew bringing you the action this week because Sam ditched us. She had a very professional interview to attend. Fancy big things for Sam. She's too cool for us, Ryan. How are you doing?
Yeah, she's qualified beyond us. We have plenty to talk about. I think we could skip the small talk, really, because not only do we have a lot of stuff to cover that's happened, but also a lot of stuff that's coming almost quite far into the future, too.
Yeah, we do. All right, so let's talk about Roster Mania. Let's get into Run It Back. This is a segment where we talk about things that have happened. We'll start with EU. There's a lot. There's not actually that much that has officially happened just yet. But my understanding is that it's like the dam's about to break, right? There is a ton going on right on the other side, this flood of roster moves, and we're waiting for like the first domino to fall, which is going to be a deluge. So the one that's been tweeted about is Rubinho tweeted that he is exploring his options outside of Heretics. The exact tweet, I think, was, let's see, he's still contracted with them, but he's looking for new options. I don't know whether that means he's on the bench or he's like been given permission to seek out free agency or a trade or a transfer, something like that. It's a little ambiguous in that regard. Do you know what's going on with Heretics? What are we?
No,
what's going on?
It's looking really bad for them because obviously there was that rumor that Avova and Nucky might be going to G2. From this team, and there's also rumors that Pora might move on. It's just like this Heretics team seems to be falling apart. Nisau's kind of gone missing in action as well for family reasons, and it is worth adding that if Heretics lose more than 3 players, they're deemed kind of like a different roster, so the points that they've accumulated over like the Valorant Champions Tour just get rescinded. They have 70 for coming second place in Masters 1. If they have too many changes, they just lose all of that progress and are quite likely not to qualify for the Worlds event at the end of the year, right? So it really is the canary in the coal mine for what's going on in Heretics, which clearly isn't good stuff at the moment.
It really is interesting as well because, okay, so the Liquipedia rumors page right now is just lit. It's crazy. The number of things that have been talked about and hinted at. Obviously, there was that big Nell report about G2 rebuilding their team, picking apart the regional rivals in Heretics and in Ascend, looking for those players specifically. But then it means that Heretics and Ascend are going to need to pick up new players, which means that other teams are going to get picked apart. Then we have FPX, who disappointed in the EMEA finals. Maybe they're looking to make a change. I don't know about that. You heard anything about FPX? Heard anything?
No, I mean, I wouldn't surprise me really from individual performances, but I would assume not, considering like they didn't look bad on an individual level, but we kind of said similar things about Mendo, didn't we, with First Strike? So who knows, really? Maybe they could drop Dimisic for somebody else because there's clearly a lot of talent in the CIS region, as we've seen with players like Durka. So maybe.
I mean, there's so many possibilities here, and it does feel like basically what Nell has tweeted. Nell, the director for oh god, I'm blanking on his publication at the moment.
It's Freaks for You, isn't it?
No,
he's involved with.
The 1PV is who he publishes with.
Oh.
I think he does also publish for Freaks for You. Maybe that's where his Valorant stuff goes. No, I think he does publish with 1PV. All right, not important. Nell, very respected reporter, good leaks, especially from anything connected to the French scene in general, but also seems to have some pretty good connections with G2 Valorant because he's always breaking those stories first. His basic view is that G2 is going to finalize the roster, and then it's going to just be a cascade effect where they're going to buy out the players that they want. Obviously, players probably want to move to play under a brand like G2. There's just a lot to appeal to a player in terms of establishment, in terms of building your star power, in terms of building your resume. That's kind of one of the best orgs in Europe to be a part of, even if we're not factoring in potential to make a juggernaut Valorant team. So they're gonna build that up, and then everybody else is going to be like, all right, well, shit, they took these players. Who are we getting to replace them?
Yeah, I mean, like, CNED going to Heretics would be a nice little move around. Cadavra from Alliance has left the team too, potentially. So, yeah, I mean, when it comes to Europe, this is just going to be the first of many moves that are happening right now. So, really, I'm not sure what to make of it right now. You even have some big players like Alex that might move over from Counter-Strike to Valorant too. So with Europe, there's always going to be a lot of moves happening. But at this point, I feel teams are more just feeling it out right now than dedicating to anything in particular.
There was also a report recently that Olaf is in fact ready to get back into competition, and that while he's going to look for a Counter-Strike team first, he might wind up in Valorant. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. It's just getting weird. It's getting wild in Europe. We'll hop across the pond to NA, where we've got a few more confirmed moves, but again, a lot that's like just on the horizon. First up is Cutler is out of TSM. This is a move that you could kind of see coming as soon as they started playing without him in the roster, because the whole justification for keeping him as part of the team before was that he was the IGL, he was calling. And then as soon as they had this comp where Hazed was calling instead, it's like, okay, well, if Cutler's not calling anymore, probably coming to an end here, Ryan. Were you surprised by this at all?
No, not really. I think the way that TSM worked around this to begin with as well really set up Cutler to be the fall guy almost, because they were using all of these different comps with Brax coming in and making sure that Cutler stayed in a team. So every time the TSM, when you had Cutler and Hazed or Cutler and Brax playing and they failed, it always reflected badly on Cutler, which I don't think is the main problem for this team. I know a lot of people might have seen the news and kind of gone, finally, this is 100% deserved, but I think it's a bit naive to think they're just dropping this player and bringing in Hazed and Brax into that 5-man roster is going to just fix things off the bat. I don't think that's how it's been for TSM. That's not really been their problem overall. But I can just imagine that if they do somewhat okay, suddenly people will see Cutler as the problem. It's like 100 Thieves when they had that PUBG roster, that they just used those players as scapegoats, even though it wasn't particularly their fault. So I feel a bit bad for Cutler, to be honest.
I do as well. I do think it was... I think that there are a lot of players who made the transition over to Valorant in the early days of the scene, who are kind of on the tail ends of their competitive careers in other games, you know, seeing that light kind of diminish. And it's like, okay, here's a chance for rebirth, bring our veteran experience in, help train up rosters and bring structure and bring experience. And that's great to have, but you get to a certain point in the longevity of a game where you start to have talent develop, start to have more players come up, and you start to need that firepower to compete. And that's kind of what I think has happened here with Cutler. I don't think he did anything wrong. I mean, obviously their team just kind of faded from the spotlight, and TSM wants to be dead center in that spotlight. I will say, as someone who, when I was first getting into CS, was a big fan of that CLG. It was CLG at MLG Columbus, I think, where it was Cutler, Hazed, Herrick, JDM, and was FNS on the roster at the time? I'm forgetting the fifth. Might have been FNS. Not sure. It was cool to see them reunite in Valorant, but that story seems to be coming to an end. I am curious to see what will be next for Cutler, whether he's going to wind up on a different roster or whether he'll move over to streaming or something like that. Obviously, if he's like... The brand from TSM would help set up a streaming career, but the flip side is the same thing that he brought to TSM, and sort of veteran structure and being able to build a roster and call for a roster and that kind of thing would benefit a lot of these younger teams where they've got a ton of raw XP or raw skill and talent, but they don't necessarily have the form to put that into practice. So it'd be cool to see him on a team. Like, I'm trying to think of specific examples, but there's a bunch of these out there where we've got these young cracked aimers, and bringing in Cutler as an IGL, or, I mean, even if he wanted to take a step back into coaching, wouldn't be a bad move.
No, not at all. It is just one of those things where he's just going to have that negative taint against him, that he was the problem for TSM, which, again, I don't necessarily think is true. I don't think bringing Braxton fixes any of the issues that they had previously. It just feels that it comes down to just like the fundamentals on how this TSM roster has not only been to begin with, but how they failed to keep up with the other teams that have overtaken them, because they used to be the top dog.
Yeah. I do want to ask you this. Here's my thought experiment. I'm a little surprised that TSM is not pulling a G2 here, where they're kind of tearing it down to a couple of studs and then trying to rebuild the roster around them. Do you think the fact that there's sort of this... I mean, they've got a really rabid fan base around this team, right? TSM in general has a rabid fan base in every esport that they're in, but I also feel like they kind of built something special in terms of content and streaming and just the vibes around this team because they were that early juggernaut. They got this huge fan base of Valorant. Do you almost think that there's like a reticence to tear the bulk of that roster down and rebuild because you don't want to lose that sort of, I guess, storyline thread, feel good vibe that's accompanied this roster?
I mean, I think it depends what TSM want to be. If they want to be champions, if they want to be the top team in North America, I just don't think you can do that with the roster that they've had for so long. So you can chip away at it, remove players like Cutler and stuff, but I do think that it's down to every single player. You could even make an argument for some cases to drop players like Sub Rosa, which obviously people will look at and kind of go, well, Sub Rosa's been like a shining light on this team, same as Wardell, but you can't just sort of take out the Haste, the Cutler, and even the Drone, because Drone has had great moments too, and just assume that that is going to fix it. So imploding a roster, I don't think makes up much sense. When you're comparing it to like G2 did the same exact thing, where every time we saw them, they had a different way of playing. They had Sub Rosa on the Omen, Sub Rosa on a Duelist. They kind of swapped up their strategies every time we saw them. And because of that, we saw no real consistency out of them. That was my problem, is just they seem so close to kind of nailing it and being a strong contender, but then they go away from losing the qualifiers, come back with something different, and they have to start from square one again. It's just insanely frustrating to watch how they're going about the fundamentals of it all, I suppose. They just look very slow to adapt and really don't understand how to keep ahead of a meta like Valorant, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of like focusing on the wrong changes, as opposed to teams like Version 1, who will highlight, that kind of had the finger on the pulse and knew exactly what they needed to do and how.
You got to imagine that if that's the case, and I agree with you, but you got to imagine that if that's the case, now you've removed Cutler, he was the IGL, so who's the next head on the chopping block? I think it's got to be tailored, right? If they don't
I was going to say,
improvement.
like, it's one of those things where I'm quite surprised that his name's not been mentioned more, because when it comes down to a team constantly coming into a tournament looking different, but not really improving in any way, it's just a different TSM look each time. You have to look at the overall architecture of who's putting all of that together, where the strategy is coming from, and go, that's not working. You could argue the same for Neil Zenio as well for G2, but obviously, these coaches need time. Neil Zenio, I don't think, has had enough. Taylor's been with this roster for a long time now, since day one.
Yeah.
So he's had plenty of time to get his act together. I do think the stage 3 is going to be maybe his last dance if he gets it wrong.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely the case. We'll see if any more changes do come through for TSM, but it's interesting. They're at least starting the motion. Another interesting move, this one I found surprising, shall we say. JC Stunny is out of Immortals by his own volition. His contract ran out, and he said, you know what? I want to try free agency. I'm not going to sign back up with Immortals. I'm not going to sign up with this roster. I'm going to see what I can get somewhere else. Now, to my eyes, there isn't an obvious landing spot for him right now. Now, maybe that is about to change this week and things are about to blow up. And I also kind of wonder, Ryan, whether part of this is that Immortals have been this farm team where they discover talent. And so maybe they're not really willing to pay, shall we say, premium price for that talent once it has had a chance to flourish. So maybe JC Stunny's looking for a little more do-re-mi. What do you think? Do you think he's looking for a competitive advantage? Do we think he's looking for a little cashola? What's your read?
I think he's looking for a bigger contender. The whole wording just seems so odd that this is a player that went into his contract running out. Negotiations were there for a re-signing, but Stanley decided that he wanted to do it on his own terms, and not many pros get that opportunity to go free agency. And it's just like, surely that security and the fact that Immortals are always a team that's up there. Yeah, they've sort of disappointed when it came to the NA finals. But you have to say that Immortals have a good influx of new talent coming in and the right kind of things going on. So I don't know if it's a case of he's putting himself out there and kind of saying to some teams like TSM or Gen G that are making moves, kind of going, hey, I believe in your guys' idea and how far this team can go. I'd be a good fit, that he's trying to sell himself. It's just a bit odd to see a player kind of go, actually, no, I don't want the, X £1,000 a month contract. I'm going to go unemployed for a bit to find better options. It's just
bold.
It's very ballsy, yeah.
It is very ballsy. You have to imagine that he's got some sort of a hint that teams are making changes who might be interested in him, right? Because if he's literally just cutting bait with Immortals and he has no clue what's out there, that is the ballsiest move. And maybe it'll pay off, maybe it won't, but whew, that is bold. I kind of love it. I love the bet on yourself, right? Saying I'm good enough that someone should come out and try and get me. And look, we know Gen G is making some changes, or with Win out, we know that maybe a team like, I mean, this is going to be a bold statement, but maybe a team like Envy is going to be looking to make some changes. They've always been like at that dance, never quite going over it. A team like XSET, they've, I think, performed beyond our expectations, but they could still try and take that next step. There's a lot of teams that could be looking to mix and match and add and drop and that kind of thing. NRG have shown that they love swapping out parts like their Legos. There's a lot of possibilities out there, and I think over the course of this next like week or two, we're really going to see a ton of them. But that's going to be interesting. We already talked about... go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I think for Stanley's case, this is a move you make when you've got something unofficial lined up. Yeah. Is what I would say. If there isn't, if he's sort of going out into... You hear it when people talk about, like, job opportunities and stuff like that and moving to a better job. You want to make sure that it's lined up before you pull the plug on the roster that you had before. So... I would be very surprised if JC Stanley came into the void of free agency with no lineup on what he might be doing next. Because there's some good teams that might be, other orgs might come in and want to throw money in or want to expand their resources on their chances to qualify for like Gen G. Whilst they didn't get any points in stage 2, they're making changes. They want to improve in some aspects. Surely those ambitions line up with Stanley's, and maybe he's just sort of thinking with Immortals, I can't do that. And, Mo's messaged me saying, hey, we would love you on the team, for example, and they've got officially that kind of thing lined up. But if he doesn't have that, man, that would be a really sad thing to see him go to free agency and then nothing.
Gen G, the more I think about it, could be a really potentially obvious swap in. They don't have the Jet anymore with Hwin, but maybe they were also looking for a little bit more versatility in agent comp, which we know JC Stani can run. So that would be an interesting fit. That would be a very...
I imagine good money as well for Gen G as well, considering the org.
My understanding is that they are really willing to roll out the checkbooks because they want to be the best team. That like, based on what they're saying behind the lines, like they're willing to put the money and put the effort in to build the best team that they possibly can, and they want to win titles. That's what they're trying to do. So yeah, that would be a very viable fit. I think those are all the roster rumors that are actually confirmed at this point. Again, so much is up in the air that probably next week's show or the week after that, we're just gonna have a million of these. But for the time being, that's what's out in the open, as I recollect at this point. So let's get into the events that happened. The NA Stage 2 Challengers Finals happened. We have our winners. Sentinels and Version 1 made it through. They're going to be the NA representatives internationally. I'm super excited about that. We talked about it a lot on Sunday when we did a little Twitter Spaces show, which you and I were like, yeah, what is this new technology? It's a good time. But I don't know. What do you make of this being NA's international representatives here?
I mean, Sentinels you would sort of expect to be up there. I think that they show the best when it comes to not only qualifying for North America, but still winning the tournament. Like, yeah, they lose some really awkward series. The one against Cloud9 kind of came down to a hair as well, literally 0.02 seconds on that defuse. But you can't argue the Sentinels are the best team in North America right now when it comes to the form and the way that they're adapting to the meta to an extent. For Version 1, this is the interesting thing. They seem to have their finger on the pulse is what I said before, but like they had a good inkling that Astra and Viper were going to be good. They practiced that a lot in the time that they had, and they were the best team when it came to getting to grips with what the game was looking like at the moment, and they surprised quite a lot of people. I just didn't expect we'd see that much headway made so soon after they came together only a couple of months ago.
The longer I've been thinking about this as well, the more excited I am that Version 1 is the second team to qualify through because of what you think of when you think of trajectories and that same facet where you're talking about, like, they figure out what the next thing is going to be. And I'm going to give a lot of that credit to Vanity. I'm sure there's more voices on that roster as well. I know EMEA's coaching them, and they're all very happy with EMEA's coaching. I'm sure Zelsis is contributing that kind of a voice as well. But Vanity's always been a player who's been, I'm trying to think of the word, he's able to find the like grimy thing that's so annoying to play against and figure out how to make it work to perfection. And I think that could work for them going, oh, you had something there.
So there's a rumor where JD might be leaving Ninjas in Pajamas. He is a CIS player. I could see him going to FPX.
Ooh. Did that just come out now? Did you hear that before?
Yeah, it came out from George Geddes from Upcomer. I'll read the top bit out. Like, the Swedish esports organization NIP are seeking replacements for JD, according to sources close to Upcomer. And that is because NIP have been playing without him, but a replacement is likely being settled. A lot of ties to Cadaver again from Alliance. So, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. No other real information other than G2 Ascend and Heretics are making a lot of moves at the moment. And so, don't know where he's going, don't know who's going to replace him. But the fact that JD could be leaving Ninjas in Pajamas is a massive loss.
I mean, yeah, that's got to be for a clear upgrade, right? Because they were doing better than we had expected recently, right? They had sort of seemed to finally find their form and be on the rise. And I mean, NIP is a huge org. NIP is a storied org. So you're not leaving that team unless you've got a very much better offer. So to my eyes, I mean, that's got to be FPX or that's got to be G2, right?
I don't think it's G2. If they're sort of trying to build a bit more of a Spanish roster,
it'd be surprising.
Why throw a Russian player in there?
FPX would be the natural link. Well, that's an interesting one. Huh.
Yeah.
Huh. That's gonna...
Anyway, yeah, North America.
North America.
I think it's more when you look at teams like 100 Thieves that lost out in pretty close fashion. Envy, Cloud9 performed better than most people gave them credit for originally. You still kind of look at this and you look at version 1 qualifying and you have to be almost embarrassed at that fact. I do think that version 1 is here to play. I don't think we're going to see them do like what FaZe did, but they have a sudden rise up. They do really well and they drop off again. I could be wrong, but the way that version 1, like how Vanity seems to understand the game and how quick he is to accept the changes and grow from there, and also just sort of approach that kind of fundamentality that we don't see from 100 Thieves when they talk about the meta and stuff. That makes me very excited about what version 1 could do in the future. And when you have players like Penny, for example, you are always going to look strong and have the firepower that you need at the best moments. He's like a League of Legends character where he gets stronger as the series goes on, like a typical like AD carry almost. So I think that having him as a player on your roster to clutch out when it's needed is going to be very handy for version 1's chances in the future. I think they could do very well in Iceland.
I also think it's very exciting to see them. I think it's cool that they're going to get like a month to just not play, work, practice, come up with stuff, and then show it in Iceland. I think that version 1's a team that could really do with that time and really have a lot of fun with it. Again, considering how young their team actually is in the game, you know, just a few months at this point, 4 months or whatever since this team was formed, to have that time to just go in the lab, as they say, and come up with all sorts of cheeky things that you can do and exploit and come up with some new strategies. I think this is going to be a pretty cool team when we get to Iceland, to be honest with you. I'm pretty excited about that one. We do have our MVP from the Stage 2 finals. You talked about him already. It's Penny. This man was cracked. This man was jacked. He was nuts. Let's roll the tape.
All of a sudden, that setup is broken, but Penny's here. He dashed away. Oh, no way.
He's going to choose to use it, but this is going to force them to either come from heaven or towards A main, and Penny is here to shut him down. It's a 3K for the Jet. And he still has the knives in hand. Crashes is going to fall.
No stopper coming his way. There's the discipline corner. It doesn't get checked again. Penny gets one on the poise, wraps around the pillar, gets a second one as well.
Side, and just as they got dominating that previous round, but Penny's coming back into it. This
fight. The defuse, Penny spots it, Penny gets it, a 4K, and he gets the defuse. Version 1 refused to go away.
Can I just say, every time Doug talks about the discipline corner, I just giggle. It just sounds like such a weird 50 Shades of Grey type, get in the discipline corner.
Like the naughty step, yeah.
Daddy is angry. Oh, man.
No. Don't do that. Oh,
I love that one.
Doug in his flowery shirts. That's just, it's not really 50 Shades of Grey, is it, with the flowery shirts that he wears, to be fair, so.
It is. It's so good. The contrast as well, the discipline corner. Oh, man, that's my favorite one. Big fan of the discipline corner.
DDK is going to add that to his fundamental list on how to cast Valorant. Don't say stuff like that, because it just takes you out of the game. But yeah, I think the version 1 have been overlooked. There's obviously going to be people that are going to sit there and go, oh, I predicted version 1 all along. Nobody did, let's be frank. But they performed much better than anticipated. And usually when you see teams come up through the first qualifier, they don't do as well when it comes to the finals, because that momentum is so important. We saw that with Team Liquid and Fnatic. They came through Challengers 2, and then they sort of won the whole thing, right? So having that kind of FaZe Smeagol momentum is so much more impactful than getting in their first round of qualifiers than working on scrims in the background. So the fact that Vanity and Version 1 were able to do that so well and look like a genuine, strong A-tier team in the region really makes me think that this is a team that could not only do well in Iceland, like I mentioned, but also qualify for that Champions event at the end of the year too.
It's interesting. It makes them a lot of fun. All right, I want to talk about everybody else. The rest. We're gonna isolate Sentinels in version 1. We also really didn't talk about Sentinels, but that's because this was expected, right? The standard that Sentinels have set is anything outside of this would have been a catastrophe. Them qualifying as the number 1 seed from NA just makes sense, and I'm glad that they're one of our international representatives because realistically they represent our best chance for NA to be the best of the world. I keep saying you're not an NA guy, Ryan, but you're imported. You're on this show. We're giving you a green card.
Exactly.
All right. Outside of the top 2, who was your biggest winner of this weekend's tournament?
I feel bad that Cloud9 got so close, but I think you have to say them. That roster is looking so good. Again, you've got players like Mitch that are showing up when he never really did on the roster beforehand. And Cloud9, not relying on tens anymore, have started to carve their own way without him. And you have to feel bad for them because they looked and shined the brightest when it came to players like Leaf that was performing super well. And I just feel bad that they had that many chances, I suppose, to qualify and lost out in 2 best of 3s that pretty much went the whole distance. I think for everybody else, Exec clearly disappointed, 100 Thieves, even though they went out in close fashion, not qualifying is a disappointment considering the caliber of team that they are. You have to feel bad for some of them, but there's teams that are expected to do as well and have the pressure that Sentinels has had on their shoulders, and they've just not lived up to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. I'm with you on Cloud9 Blue being the biggest winner. I don't think anyone, Cloud9 Blue included, expected this roster to gel this quickly. They were already on the upswing, but when you're bringing a player like Floppy in, you're like, okay, is that maybe going to interrupt some of the momentum, or are we maybe going to have to take a step back and refigure this out a little bit? No, he slotted in nicely, and the best part is he didn't slot in as just go kill. He slotted in as a piece of the team. They didn't need him to be overperforming. They didn't need him to be playing. Everybody else was popping off, and it's like, all right, Floppy is a piece of this puzzle that we've added in. He's not the centerpiece, but he is a piece. Now
Zeta as well. I said this on the Twitter Spaces show we did. There's a strong chance that Zeta is the best player in the world by the end of the year if he keeps growing this way. It's not the typical fragger, but we've not really seen a player like that other than maybe Angel for FPX that is really pulling the strings and doing it so well. You say support players, but more often than not at this point, it's just those players that don't always get the frags or the IGL. Zeta is the perfect support player that you want on any team, and because of that, I think there's a strong chance that he's on the top 10 list of HLTV at the end of the year, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's another thing that I'm going to say in his favor as well. Coming over, changing region, changing language that you common, he hasn't missed a beat. He's been phenomenal, but it's only going to get easier, right? Even I don't care how good your second language is, there's still a moment of brain translation when you're figuring out calls and comms and things like that just maybe slows you down half a tick. Maybe it's completely negligible, but it's still something that's there. And as you get more and more used to it, spend more time within a system, more time calming, less time having that be an issue, you're just going to get better. You're just going to get better. And he's already so good. So I'm with you in terms of Zeta being one of those top players, and the sky's the limit for him. And then the other factor is that Zeppa's presumably getting worked into this roster at some point. As we talked about, that was on the Spaces show, right, where we talked about this?
We sort of assumed it would be Mitch being dropped, but as time has gone on, people are more calling for Poised because Poised is good, and he was definitely a player that you take a shot with because he was a young talent. But I think that him being dropped from Cloud9 wouldn't be a bad move for the player because he would just be a great envy. It's like a young 19-year-old player for a striker for Man United. Is he going to be good enough for the first team of Man United? Probably not. So you loan him out to some other teams, or you let some of the smaller teams buy him. And those teams are going to be really thankful that they have a player as impactful as Poised. It can still has room to grow overall, right? So I think that Cloud9 made a good bet to pick him up in the first place, but now that things have changed so quickly into their momentum, and they have Zeppa and Floppy sort of waiting in the wings, I don't think it's necessarily a cruel move to take Poised out of the picture and play with the 5 players that they have, because it's like Fnatic, right? It's the business of it. And I think the Poised would instantly get picked up by another team in the region, hands down, and would be great for them.
They could also keep him as a 6th man. I mean, Cloud9 has shown a willingness to hold contracts to sort of bait out these. I mean, TENS is obviously an outlier example and an extreme example of, baiting out these loans, making some money on the side and figuring out a sale at some point down the line. But Poised, Doink Machine, he could still get a lot of interest, a lot of attention. Still love the fact that he rose up through the ranks under the name Doink Machine. It was Doink Machine 69 too.
It was something like that.
It was.
It reminds me of the whole Overwatch League, like, what's in a name? And it's just Doink Machine 69. it was similar or something. I can't remember what the name was for that original trailer, but yeah. I think that North America looked better in this tournament, because I think there's been a lot of people saying that their strats regressed. I think we saw teams that did happen for. 100 Thieves is probably the main one. Ambox, NRG, even Envy didn't seem to have a real good grasp on how they wanted to play stuff. And I think teams like Version 1 that have a good fundamental understanding of this is the crazy direction that the meta's going, we're going to keep on top of that, instead of, the old Counter-Strike players going, we don't need to change anything. The meta sort of revolves around us, and because we played Counter-Strike for 20 years, we don't deal with change, because change never happens in Counter-Strike until you get Ancient in your map pool, and then everybody loses their goddamn mind. So
they updated the chickens too. They updated the chickens. Very important.
Yeah, I think that when you're a young, I can very easily see, with the way that things have gone at the moment, players, the older ones that have come from Counter-Strike, their time in Valorant is incredibly limited unless they get that, in their head that this is going to be a very volatile meta, and if you almost refuse to change it any fashion, you aren't worth having on a team.
I'm going to move us on to the rest of the world, or no, actually EMEA finals. I'm skipping over region just because we're going long. I've still got things
easy
I want to talk
do that,
about, but I'll just keep going. All right, EMEA Challengers finals, Liquid and Fnatic make it through. I know a large party was hoping for FPX to be the representative internationally, but these are two teams that there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of star power. There's a lot of skill. This Fnatic with Durka looks amazing. I mean, how happy are we with these two teams as the representatives for EMEA?
I mean, I'm fuming because I predicted FPX and Gambit, so that kind of all fell apart. I think that Turkey did exactly what I mentioned before about teams not adapted to the meta fast enough, and how they, pretty much embarrassed themselves on the main stage, let's be honest. Gambit played as good as expected, but it really shows to me that momentum's such an important thing. If I'm like a G2 and stage 3 comes around, you bomb out a Challengers 1, you blow up your roster, just sign the freakishly best players and just honeymoon period your way through. Because that's what I think Fnatic and to a lesser extent Liquid did. That we've not really seen Fnatic or this sort of iteration of Liquid right now lose at all. So because of that, you kind of just, you don't know how they're going to react like Sentinels, right? That's why I think Sentinels could do well at Iceland. They could lose to like Gamelanders, for example, and they might come back twice as strong. For Fnatic and Liquid, I don't know what they're going to do if they, get hit hard by like the Southeast Asia team. So Fnatic have looked leaps and bounds better with Durka and Magnum. Liquid, Scream and Jampy Online is going to be really fun. They were just the best on the day. And some other teams like FPX grossly underperformed to the level that you'd expect.
Now, do you think that that's like an aberration? I mean, obviously, I think they're the quote unquote biggest loser from this bracket, just because everybody was
just
crowning
across
them, ready to give it
stage
to them.
2.
Yeah,
like nobody underperformed. And it's down to FPX. I think. I think that Team Liquid played well. I think Gambit played well, but FPX didn't show up there. Like we saw Angel running in onto a site getting killed, and because he was so far ahead of everybody else, he couldn't get traded. So he was just dying needlessly in some cases. So yeah, FPX just have a really big problem with getting this far in the tournament and letting nerves get the better of them.
Which is interesting. Do you make a coaching change? Do you attribute that to Angel and the calling? Obviously, he's the player who's gotten you here and who's you've built around. You swap out one piece. Like there's, I don't think there's a clear path forward. I almost compare FPX's result here. It has some parallels to Envy and NNA, where they're doing well enough that like you got to be pretty happy with this team, but you want to win. And if you're not going to win, if you're gonna fall at that last hurdle, if you're gonna fall at the finish line, does it matter that you can always get to the finish line? Is there an element of like, well, we got to change something because we want to be the top, but if you make that change, are you risking getting out of that final race altogether?
Yeah, I mean, like with the FPX stuff, I can see, the more that I think about it, the more that I can see Shadow being dropped for JD. Like, that would be an interesting move, bit more aggressiveness. Kind of like what Fnatic did with Doma, because Doma was the only entry player for this team, and he had a lot riding on him if he underperformed, and Fnatic underperformed by extension. FPX, if Zipan doesn't really show up, you have Angel, sure, but nobody else is really going to be that entry and frag out like crazy. So you add in players like Durka for Fnatic, he can do a lot of the heavy lifting. Doma can play second fiddle or, you know, be the MVP in some of the games like he was in this one. Same with JD, if he gets added into this roster, who really knows? But I do think that Team Liquid have ascended. I remember watching that BDS series and being like, Team Liquid didn't deserve to win that. They just relied on clutching out. You can't rely on that on a consistent basis, you know. But then they came in with some really good strategies, like the no duelist one on Haven absolutely boomed FPX. You can't say that either team didn't deserve this run because they beat all of the high contenders to get here. The problem is just how much of that is kind of like FaZe Clan in stage one, where it's just that momentum that's taken them that far. What happens if that momentum starts to wane? Do they recover like Sentinels, or do they just drop off the face of the earth like teams like Luminosity? Like, that's what I don't know about these teams, and that's what scares me about Iceland, is they might just come in and underperform because it's a brand new environment, and they're not experienced enough overall, which sounds silly, to really recuperate and recover when they need to.
So speaking about some of the other teams that we're going to get in Iceland, we've got the rest of the world to talk about here. We're still waiting on 3 teams from BR and LATAM to come through, 2 from the Brazil region and 1 from the Latin American region. Korea, another upset, very similar to FPX almost, I would say. New churn for Korea. They take it through. No Vision Strikers, the team that had the absurd 100+ map win streak, absurd results all through. And I think they were the last of the early game Titans to kind of be dethroned, if you will, because we had G2 and EU who went on that crazy run of winning every tournament. They got dethroned a long time ago. TSM has long since been dethroned in NA, but Vision Strikers were the equivalent of that team in Korea, except they kept it going, and now they've fallen short in the most important time here. Ryan, I don't honestly know much of anything at all about New Churn.
I mean, I feel that this has been happening for a while for New Turn. They've had some really close series. They almost beat Vision Strikers a couple of months ago now, maybe like 6 weeks. They played against each other in the finals for Masters 1, and Vision Strikers won that 3-2. They had a 26 map win rate on Split until that series where they lost it for the first time ever. And it feels that New Turn has just been chipping away at the heels a little bit. And when this game came across, and Vision Strikers have previously lost as well a couple of weeks ago to F4Q, I think it was only going one way. New Turn won it 2-0. They won the finals 3-0 against Damwon Gaming, who I think won Worlds, right, of like 2020 in League. So that's a big organization that's also putting a lot of resources into it. I think that New Turn was going to prove to be a much tougher team for like Western lineups, more so than Vision Strikers at the moment, because Vision Strikers haven't been looking as good as they have done. They innovated a lot of the game, but they haven't really done that much since. And with agents like Astra, they played it, but they didn't seem to get to grips with it the same way as we saw Fnatic do it, or F4Q that had Zunba, who used to play in the Overwatch League, as their Astra player. New Turn players like Apply, which is their Jet, Solo, which is their Killjoy player, and I think played a bit of Viper, and then like Glakia, who's their Sova, was like the shining star. I think the New Turn is like a top 4 finisher at this point. I think that if it was Vision Strikers, they won't get out of groups, but this New Turn team should be appreciated a bit more instead of people going, it's not Vision Strikers, it's not a good team. Like, get that idea out of your head. Everything's changing around the world, including Korea.
I do love that. I do want to say I'm a little disappointed we're not going to get Vision Strikers purely for the narrative.
Yeah, for sure.
It feels like for the last 6 months, we've had all these people coming out and going, Vision Strikers is going to take the international community by storm. Watch out for Vision Strikers. Like, once we get lands, watch out for Vision Strikers. Watch out for Vision Strikers. So on and so forth. The Korea casters coming over and being like, these teams are going to be really dangerous. Vision Strikers could be really, and then they don't make it. So from
one thing that I just wanted, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I remember like the sideshow videos very early on talking about what Vision Strikers were doing. Remember that 2-hour VOD review that Sean Garris did of how Vision Strikers played Icebox in First Strike. Have we seen any breakdowns or videos like that about Vision Strikers since?
No.
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think anybody's really looked at them and gone, oh my God, they're 200 IQ, they're leading the line when it comes to strategies. And I think that's kind of part of the problem, is when you're a team that rely on doing zany stuff and not fragging out the same way as Newturn did, at some point you're just going to hit a road that you can't cross. And when you have players like Astra in the game that pretty much takes over the whole meta, if you don't get how to use her in those kind of 200 IQ fashions and you're not leading the line there, somebody else will. Absolutely will.
I always think there's also this danger of being the front runner, right? Where you're like, okay, well, we're winning, so don't
everybody's
mess with
coming
it.
for you, yeah.
Don't mess with it. Don't change things up too much, and everybody's targeting you. So every other team is like, oh, we got this new agent. Let's mess with it. Let's see how we can upset them. And you're like, well, we're still winning with this comp. So like, check her out, but maybe we won't work her in yet until we really see how she performs. Got to keep adapting in this game. All right, Southeast Asia, X10. X10, I think, has been kind of expected for a while. They've been talked about a lot. Happy to see them be the representative for the region. Think they could do some serious damage, but again, just don't know that much about them. I'm excited to see what they're going to look like.
It's one of these ones where, when, like, let's be honest, people are probably looking at Southeast Asia being the worst region, probably in line with LATAM America, out of all of the regions that are attending. Fine. So you might look down on X10, but X10 haven't lost a series since February. Like, you have a very dominant team in a pretty poor region. That doesn't mean that that team is also poor by extent, right? And it's a big region. There's a lot of different teams. It works out well for X10 because they get the top points and everybody else is fighting over second, third, fourth. It's different teams that we're seeing in Challengers finals for stage 1 and stage 2. The fact that X10 is so consistent, I could see them going into a series against version 1 and winning it, and people being like, I didn't expect that. X10 are used to winning, and I think that this is a team with like Patty Pan as well from the Overwatch League. There's a lot of Overwatch players on this roster. This is a powerhouse of a team from Thailand, and I think that people are going to write them off, and they really, really shouldn't. This is a team that can do quite a lot of work.
There's also always been some FPS skill in Southeast Asia that's been underrated. I know, at least in CS, I mean, the Asian CS scene, there's a ton of raw talent. There's just maddening team play and calling and just insane standards of the way they play the game. So that tends to limit how they do in international competition. But there's a lot of talent there, and in Valorant, that could translate much better. So I'm excited to see how that works. Crazy Raccoons coming through from Japan. Do we think Japan? I mean, you were saying you expected SEA and LATAM to be counted out. I'll be honest, I'm counting out Japan. They've never really done anything in a long time in attack FPS as a region. That would be a shocker for me if Crazy Raccoons came into the international market and did some damage.
Yeah, it's also a region that was like dominated by Absolute Jupiter in the very early days, and then we saw like some tournaments. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a television broadcast thing in Korea that did a tournament. They did a lot of stuff in Overwatch, but I can't remember who it was called. It wasn't like Apex and that kind of thing, but they had teams from Japan, Southeast Asia, like Attack All Around AHQ, and it was just Vision Strikers that dominated it because, of course. So, yeah, I think by that extent, people had kind of written off Japan as just being a diet Korea, in all honesty, when it comes to how good that team is. But now we're having Korean ePods move through. Munchkin, that used to be on Cloud9's Korean team, and also, again, in the Overwatch League for Seoul Dynasty, I think it was. It's one of those things where it's like they are rapidly improving, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to do well going into Masters 2, kind of like you say. They could be a surprise as well. You know, we were kind of saying similar stuff about version 1 in the Challengers finals, and look what they did. So I don't want to write off Crazy Raccoons completely because they are, yet again, like X10, very dominant team in their region. But yeah, I think watching their Absolute Jupiter game, like the grand final, is probably a good one to get a good idea on what you can expect from them. But me, not as much as some of the other teams, I'll be frank.
Yeah, I'm going to write them off completely. But I'm happy to be wrong. But I'll do it. I'll do it right now. If they win a series at Masters, I'll be nicely surprised. And obviously, we're still waiting on our Brazil and LATAM representatives. We need to have the match between LATAM North and LATAM South to figure out who is actually representing LATAM, and then we need some more.
It's like Crew versus Infinity, isn't it? So Crew's the org that's owned by Sergio Aguero, which is an interesting one.
Oh, that's funny. They're gonna take a bite out of the competition.
Like, I don't want to name it. I was almost going to. A coach from like a tier 2 team in North America basically scrims teams like Infinity and Six Sense, the old LDM roster that got picked up, which that's sad to not see. Considering all of the shit that they've had to deal with, would have been really nice to have seen them be picked up and then go to Iceland, but unfortunately not. But they still got a lot of points, so that's really good to see. So we might see them at the big Worlds event at the end of the year. They're kind of like the levels of like Knights in NA and stuff. So I do think that LATAM is probably much better to get a grip on when it comes to how well they can do. But they're also playing on LAN for the final between LATAM North and LATAM South. So even though it's probably going to be in, I want to say Spanish, not Portuguese. I could be horribly wrong with what language. The majority of Latin
should be Spanish.
Yeah, I was going to say like Brazil's Portuguese, but the rest of Latin America,
really
for the most part, is Spanish. Yeah. Like that'll be an interesting series to watch because it'll be a LAN kind of like Brazil was for first try. So yeah, like, and there's no other real Valorant happening this week. So even though it's in a different language,
check it
you
out.
can watch it, keep up to date. Yeah, exactly.
But the casters are hype. We'll find out. Moving on from the Challengers finals that we've had, there was another event that took place literally last night, 2 nights ago. Last night, NSG Summer Championship Open 4 concluded. This was just the local summer championship qualifier, right? There's $5,000 on the line, I think, for these, or some amount of money on the line for these, and you get points in the circuit to qualify to summer champs. Rise win it over Soar in the final. They had a nice run. Looked like Shanks was on fire for that Rise team. Obviously, there's some question marks around this Rise team, but you can't deny the talent. There is a ton of talent. There's a ton of firepower. It'll be interesting to see if they can rise up the ranks and make their mark at summer champs.
Yeah, I mean, it's just good to see a lot of these teams play out. And I think, like, whilst it's like, this isn't VCT, this doesn't matter. Look at the teams that played a lot. Like, now we got a big break for those that don't make it to Masters 2 between now and Stage 3. What teams came up between First Strike and VCT starting because they played a lot of tournaments?
Oh, Mr. Version 1.
I was thinking more like LG and Xset, right? Because
true. Okay, well, that was a while ago. Yeah.
But I mean, like, in that big gap where they played a lot of third-party events, they leveled up a considerable amount in comparison to like 100 Thieves and TSM that just kind of scrimmed and didn't play any official tournaments. So I do think that, like, whilst, it's not the top tier when it comes to VCT, there's a strong chance that these teams that start to do well in these third-party tournaments that are NSG and others could actually surprise quite a lot in Stage 3. It's one to keep an eye on for sure. Especially these like changes and roster moves and stuff too.
I mean, getting battle tested, getting experience in officials, as much as scrims gives you information, officials are really where you start to see it tested. Even if it's not, the highest level of competition, that's still very valuable info to go forward. So that is another team with a lot of circuit points. And circuit points are going to matter because the team that had the most circuit points won the monthly, so they don't need the circuit points anymore. So all right, moving on. Iceland is coming up. Some changes to Iceland were announced. No breeze. We were very glad to see that come through. That's Riot. Look, again, as a guy who comes from CS, watching the Riot just look at this and go, oh, you know what, we did do it dumb, that was a mistake, we're gonna not do it. That's so jealous.
That's what I thought, that they saw Ancient coming in and Train being taken out and everybody's like reaction, and Riot kind of had a look and went, is this how we look to... Is this how we look? Okay, let's not do that because that's really dumb. And also, it's important to note that, it's 4 weeks, so it kind of falls in line to what Riot set themselves up for. But it's not fair for LATAM and Brazil are still playing their qualifiers. They would have 3 weeks, which include traveling to Reykjavik, being in quarantine for a week. It's just not fair. And get a show match. Get Angel and Tens and MW0 all playing on Breeze. That'll get far more viewership than just it being used in the first round of qualifiers in that tournament. That's what you should be doing. And I'm 100%. Excited that Riot have done that.
I do like to imagine that the Riot esports team just has a whiteboard on the wall that's like their vision board, and it just has written on it in big block letters, what does Valve do? Do not that. Do the opposite.
That's what competitive integrity means. It's like a code word of being the opposite of Valve.
Oh God, Valve, please stop killing the game. No, I actually don't mind the ancient change, but that's a chance for another podcast. Still,
you got to pay $1 to see the stats of the post-mortem of Counter-Strike.
That sucks.
What is that? What is that? But
we're not going to get into it. I'm not happy about that one. But Riot, good move. Praise to Riot. Listen to community feedback. Said, you know what? This is a bad idea. This is a dumb idea. We want the competition to be as good as possible. Do a show match. Do that kind of thing. Make it much better in that regard. That's a big change. We've already talked a lot about how this is going to look. I'm just excited for this big long break. I wrote here that the teams are going to strat, anti-strat, adapt to strat, circles and circles we go. Like, everybody's going to be trying to adapt to every other region's play style. And so I don't know what styles are actually going to come out in the event, but it's going to be cool to watch. Moving on. Masters 3 is announced. We're going to Berlin. Berlin, baby.
Apparently, it's not out of the LEC studios, which I thought it was going to be. It's going to be in like an actual auditorium. So maybe it's one of those things where, like, if they have it in an auditorium, they can get an audience. But if for whatever reason COVID's still kind of problematic in Germany, they can probably just take it back to the LEC studio and do it out of there, kind of like they would. Yeah, so like that's kind of my take on it. But yeah, like they clearly know that Europe's the best region to do them in, and so we're getting one in Berlin.
I mean, Europe's the best region to do them in terms of maybe some predictability with COVID at this point.
Yeah.
Although my understanding is Germany hasn't been doing so hot, but I will say they have a nice test case in that ESL is trying to run ESL Cologne, IEM Cologne. But before this, they're not doing it with an audience. They're doing it with, but they're doing it with players in person. So that'll be a nice test case of whether you can do LAN properly in Germany beforehand.
Most
like
people will have their
Canary.
second vaccine at that point. Like,
hopefully.
I mean, I'm still waiting for my second, but it's a bit different than it is in North America and some other countries in Europe that I think are still lagging behind. But yeah, Germany, I mean, it's tough because it's so central to traveling around the world, right? That's why the LEC is there and not like Poland or whatever. But yeah, the fact that they have announced this before we even get that first international LAN makes me happy to see that Riot are going in this direction. And apparently the rumor is that Worlds, like the Champions event, is going to be out of Vancouver in Canada. Because an SCA caster was talking about it and interviewing Patipan, I think. Might have just been wrong information, but it's certainly like food for thought. Like, oh, that'd be an interesting place to do it.
That would be super interesting. My brother actually lives in Vancouver, so that'd be a good excuse for me to go visit. Come on, right? Hook your boy up. No, it's cool though. And as someone who lived in Berlin for a couple of years, Berlin's a sick city. It's awesome to have events there. It's a great city to visit. Obviously, this year, no clue what it's like because the world is strange. But still an awesome city, cool city to look around. Awesome to have events there. Big fan of the announcement. We've got one more announcement to wrap up our show here. I think we're just gonna let this roll and let it run because we got another big NSG event on the horizon. It's Game Changers, baby. We got another Game Changers tournament coming in, a tournament for the women's scene. That's awesome. It's in partnership with Dignitas. It's a 50 grand Game Changers tournament. Hell yeah. Hosted by Nerd Street Gamers, happening in June. That's awesome, baby. And we got an announcement video, so let it roll, and we'll see you next time.
Spots out one over towards lane. The rest of the squad right behind that Phoenix, though, trying to get as much as she can, and it's a double kill, making a triple on the site.
He's still kicking it in sight. Oh, I'm not sure how that didn't hit, but it was narrowly close. And Annie Mall's pushing in. She'll just pick up 3-4 kills. The defender side, Thomas means it's going to be harder to use the lockdown. Here comes the Bucky. 2 frags from Zoe, make it 3. The Bucky doing all the work. They're all the way in Snowman. Flanking onto B. Athena just has a Spectre. Ooh, it still gets a shot. It's rough, though. A second as well. Athena, that's massive from her.
And he's going to try to move in closely, but there's one just inside the cubby. There's going to be a perfect crossfire set. The first one to made, but the flick still comes perfectly out for Annie Dro.
4 bullets, but how much does she need? It's half. Not a lot of time, but she'll swing out, and Sholiana wins it.
Stephanie, as she's the last one to go, it's a 1 versus 1.
Benita peeking out with the recon, gets 1, and the second as well, Benita!